Fala, galera, bora tomar um cafezinho? Hoje vamos, cafezinho um pouco mais tarde, tive afazeres, né? Ontem deu um problema aqui, eu não sei o que ocorreu, eu acredito que foi por causa do temporal que deu em Porto Alegre ontem. Minha internet, sinal tava péssimo para live. Tomara que hoje tenha melhorado, porque bateu água aqui, gurizada. Vou chamar a galera aqui no grupo aqui, tá? A gente vai ver uma videoaula com Chris Larsen. Para quem não sabe, é um dos cofundadores da empresa. Vou chamar a galera para ver esse vídeo aí. Olhar os melhores momentos. É uma live que ocorreu já há um tempinho, mas foi no Google Talk. A gente vai estudar. Boa noite, Grazi. Vou chamar a galera no grupo. Ontem, cara, infelizmente a live deu vários problemas, gurizada. Fiquei até meio constrangido, pedi perdão pro pessoal lá no grupo lá da questão. Não sei o que ocorreu. Para mim o sinal tava tudo de pé, tudo tranquilo, mas quando botava o vídeo a rodar, trancava tudo. Não sei o que ocorreu. Boa noite, vou chamar a galera no grupo aí para a gente começar a live. A gente vai ver uma palestra com Chris Larsen. Para quem não sabe, ele é, junto com o Brad Garlinghouse, estão sendo enquadrados. Uma palestra que ocorreu 4 anos atrás, mais ou menos, só que foi na Google, tá? A Google já via já a questão de blockchain, a Ripple. Boa noite, galera. Vou chamar o pessoal aí para a gente começar a estudar. Hoje também deu uma situação de outro terremoto, né, na Romênia. O pessoal postou no grupo. Cara, tá complicado. Muito complicado. Chamar o pessoal no Telegram. E vamos começar. Boa noite para vocês aí, Rafa, Daniel, Fábio, Fagner, Grazi, Eri. Muito boa noite. Cara, vamos começar nós, né? Porque vai ser tipo uma palestra. Eu vou tentar aqui, se estiver dando algum problema, que nem ontem que estava ocorrendo, travando, vocês já me falam. Vamos ficar ricos. Fato. David, hoje peguei uma moeda de 18 centavos e vendi a 5,60. Valorização. Pô, parabéns, Eli. É isso aí, cara. Muito bom. Isso aí. Fez um famoso day trade. Cara, eu não tenho mais esse tempo. Graças, se tu tá, imagina nós. Tá todo mundo ansioso. A gente tá numa expectativa. Março tá aí, vamos ver o que nos aguarda. Você tem que ter muita calma nessa hora. Boa noite, Neto. Neto Travaim. Esse aí é antigo. Guerreiro antigo do canal aí. Gurizada, eu vou botar uma palestra pra gente assistindo, tá? Pra quem não... Eu acredito sim que a maioria das pessoas que investem no projeto nem imagina mais ou menos que é o Chris Larsen. Cara, ele tá sendo processado junto na SEC, tá? Eu vou botar a rodar uns minutos e eu vou vir aqui no chat de novo para ver se tá rodando tudo ok, tá? Bora pro vídeo.
These two are, we have the founder of Ripple, Chris Larsen, and we have its current CTO, Stefan Thomas. We're very, very excited to have them.
This foi na Google Talks,
tá? A little kind of brief intro. Chris got his MBA from Stanford. He started eLoan, which is kind of a mortgage lender. It was actually the first platform to freely give out FICO credit scores to its users. He started Prosper, which is...
Deixa eu ver o chat. Galera, a princípio tá rodando bacana, hein? Confirmem para mim no chat ali. Eu botei o vídeo alguns minutinhos, não tá travando nada. Rodou legal o vídeo? Pra gente poder assistir de boa, que ontem tava travando tudo. Vou botar de novo ali e vocês confirmem para mim, tá? Rafa disse que tá ok. Vou botar mais um pouco, tá rodando aí de boa aí o vídeo. Eu vou deixar mais um pouquinho e vou confirmar com vocês no chat, tá? Pra gente assistir a palestra aqui de boa.
Stefan Thomas is the CTO of Ripple Labs.
Ele é o CTO da Ripple.
He was the CTO of numerous tech companies like eLoad and TechSpare. He founded
Deixa eu ver no chat aí.
which created this kind of...
Rodando de boa? Tá ok? Tá ok? Beleza, eu acredito ontem, Daniel, foi questão mesmo do temporal, cara. Bateu água ontem em Porto Alegre. Quem é aqui do Sul aqui confirmou, teve um comentário lá. Então tá, vamos continuar então. A gente vai estudando isso aí. Pra quem não sabe, é o Chris Larsen, tá? E o Stefan Thomas, o Chris Larsen tá sendo enquadrado pela SEC. Esse vídeo saiu na Google Talks, tá? já faz um tempo, teve bastante visualizações, foi em 2018, e naquela época já a Ripple estava se destacando. Tanto que a Google convidou eles para uma palestra, tá? Vamos assistir. Eu não assisti, eu vou assistir com vocês na íntegra. Bora pro
Bitcoin
vídeo.
primer video, which amassed 8 million views and was a primer for a lot of people to just learn about kind of the basics of Bitcoin, and it kind of blew up on the web, so I'd check that out. And he's a board of directors, he's on the board of directors, sorry, at the JS Foundation, and he's the current CTO of Ripple. Ripple describes itself as the only enterprise solution for blockchain. It allows institutions to send money globally in a fast, frictionless, and cheaper way.
Própria Google, representante da Google já falava naquela época, em 2018, que a Ripple era a única, vamos dizer, com capacidade para mandar dinheiros globalmente de maneira rápida, sem atrito e mais barato que o Bitcoin, em 2018. Eles já tinham essa visão, a Google, tá?
And its kind of broader eventual aim is to create an internet of value, which I'm really excited to talk to both of these guys about. So without further ado, please give a hand for Chris and Stefan. Awesome, guys. Can you guys just give us kind of a brief bio in your own words, your career and how you came to found Ripple Labs and then get involved?
Great, happy to. And first of all, thanks for having us. And thanks for not making a Bart Simpson joke. Appreciate that. Yeah, as you mentioned, we've been in fintech for about 20 years now, with kind of two startups previously, eLearn and Prosper. Kind of the common thread there, those were focused on the consumer. Ripple obviously is focused on enterprise, and there's some learnings that I had from that I'll share later. But the idea of using the internet to democratize finance. I think we did a lot of good there, but we were always limited by just a fundamental lack of infrastructure in fintech. So kind of in my view, fintech really hasn't even started. It has sort of been a stepchild of the internet boom, because fintech really has to involve both data and money. And so far, you've only had the ability to move data. So there's both a lot of excitement, a lot of frustration that we couldn't go further. At the same time, was always keeping an eye on what was going on with virtual currencies. And Bitcoin obviously was a real breakthrough, but there have been a lot of attempts over the years. And so we were watching things like Linden dollars, which was currency, and that kind of existed in the early days. Second Life, Bill Rosdale, kind of an amazing guy, still the coolest guy in crypto, right? Things like Vermont dollars, kind of this idea of local currencies in a very small community, super interesting. Obviously, Beans and Floors, which were two big, well-funded projects during the first .com boom that sort of failed spectacularly. But it just seemed like it was a matter of time before you'd have a global digital asset with no, kind of government backing and
sem nenhum tipo de governo.
As far as Ripple itself, the roots actually go back to about 2004. There was something called the Ripple Project, created by Ryan Fugger, a Canadian gentleman. He was just really a neat guy, and he tried really to kind of give birth to this idea of a peer-to-peer platform for people exchanging their own credit and essentially their own currency. Every person would have their own currency. Super interesting concept that was a big part of what influenced us. Kind of fast forward to 2011.
Eles pegaram esse projeto aí do Ryan.
Arthur Bretto, Jed McCaleb, and David Schwartz. And this is, of course, after
Arthur Bretto, McCaleb,
earlier. They were fascinated by what Bitcoin did, but they were frustrated by the enormous waste of energy that is sort of at the heart of mining, of Bitcoin. So they set out to build a more efficient consensus algorithm, and they came up with something really beautiful. They also were inspired by what Ryan Fugger had done at the Ripple Project, and kind of also brought in that idea of kind of pathfinding algorithms so that anything of value can be exchanged along with that digital asset to really, I think that was kind of the birth point of this internet of value.
The Intelligent Protocol, which we'll show in a little bit, actually is almost like an overlay protocol over blockchains, but then also traditional financial systems. And that allows you to innovate in different parts of the network independently instead of having this sort of central governance model where everyone has to agree to any rule changes that are happening.
I think this is like a critical point. I think we
Cara, eu vou ver, confirmar com vocês aí. Tá de boa? Tá rodando bacana. Top, tá de boa. Imagem normal, tá ok, beleza. Isso aí que eu queria só confirmar. Só na imagem do meu celular que tá um pouco embaçado. Ah, galera, pode ser a tua internet, Alex, aqui tá rodando tranquilo, confirma aí. Aqui é uma aula, cara, de 2018. Esse aqui tá sendo enquadrado, tá? Por ele ser um dos donos, junto com o Brad Garnerhouse. Ele vai explicar o projeto ponta a ponta para vocês, para quem tem alguma dúvida da onde surgiu a ideia da Ripple, tá?
The realization that a blockchain was not going to be the solution to the biggest problem we think the world has right now in this whole fintech area, which is there is no internet of value. And why blockchain, and a lot of people talk about Bitcoin's going to be a new protocol for money. Well, it's really a database, right? So a single database or a single network cannot be the network of networks. And so that was kind of the big flaw, and that's what led to, I think, Stefan having this kind of aha moment of the need for something like ILP, which was a dangerous moment for.
It was scary at first.
Yeah.
Like we were out there promoting this asset like XRP, like telling everyone, hey, you should put all your balances on this ledger. You should do all your transactions through this one system. And we knew the friction from that. But then again, like stepping back from that and suddenly saying like, oh, there are going to be many systems was very scary. And so we actually waited almost a year to publish the white paper until we had, in our minds, have resolved a strategy around what's XRP's role in this new world and how do we make sure that our technologies are still needed and still necessary and can benefit this new world. Like how do we re-architect everything to so I think we're still in the process of like rolling out all of the different pieces. But it was that sort of 1 year period from, I would say, mid 2014 when we first had that realization to October 2015 when the white paper for Ledger came out, where we tried to kind of put all the pieces in place for it.
Because remember, Ripple always was different from Bitcoin in that you could put anything of value in it, right? So this idea of kind of, we call it IOUs.
A Ripple sempre foi diferente do Bitcoin, que você poderia botar qualquer coisa de valor na XRP. Bitcoin, se eu não me engano, consegue dinheiro só, né? Agora a Ripple pega muito mais que isso, somente o dinheiro. A Ripple tá pegando, cara, commodities, tokenização, metais preciosos, é um mercado, cara, a gente tá recém no começo. Que nem ele disse, a gente está recém no começo das fintechs. É um novo mercado, uma nova era de fazer, vamos dizer, finanças.
Or balances, but really being value agnostic, and that then being the engine for the exchange of that thing of value. But having the combination of ILP with XRP, we think that's kind of the killer formula.
Yeah, so now you can have any type of value, like any currency, but also any type of ledger. So like anything from a centralized ledger to a blockchain, etc.
And if we look at kind of stepping way back, kind of the macro problem that we think again the world has, this lack of an internet of value. You kind of argue that this gets to the heart of the problem with globalization, which is obviously under a lot of stress today, right? It's kind of not working for a lot of people. And we kind of, we don't think of it as like, well, globalization is bad. We think of it as globalization is actually incomplete. Until you have an internet of value, you really can't have true globalization. You sort of need these three core interoperability technologies working all together. You need interoperability of data, of goods, and money, right? So the world today, of course, has interoperability of data. It's completely transformed the world over the last 20 years. It has interoperability in goods through, a simple thing called the shipping container. Which, before that was invented, shipping stuff was incredibly inefficient.
Tu viu como ele falou tanto em globalização lá em 2018 já nessa palestra?
To train the truck, any port in the world, you have interoperability of goods since the 1950s. That's sort of what an internet of value is. It's like the shipping container for value. And again, that can't be a blockchain. A blockchain is like a single shipping company that will, you'll max out that shipping company and you'll have a dependency on that one shipping company. A shipping container, you can create endless shipping containers. It has no effect on any other shipping containers deployed. That's sort of what ILP is, almost the ultimate decentralization. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it.
For the technical people in the audience, it's a stateless protocol, so you can literally just run it over different systems. So it doesn't keep any balances.
And then we think really good things happen when the world finally has a full kind of a globalization platform. But this has to happen. And again, what does this mean now that we don't have it right now? It means, we all know sending $50 to Europe is kind of impossible, right?
Yeah.
We know the example of the Airbnb host in Tanzania, who should be making $29 on a rental, and by the end of the day, $9 is showing up. This is an actual example, right? So that's a problem with relatively big amounts of value. Think about the 2 billion people in the developing world. The Gates Foundation would say they need to be able to send 50 cents to be real participants in the global economy. Take that even further, if you think about all the connected devices and applications that probably should be empowered to send value, that might need to be, a thousandth of a penny. That's just not possible until you have this internet of value in place. So the world is being held back by this. And we think that's the true breakthrough that this whole, whatever you want to call this industry, really is all about.
There are some detractors of Ripple that say it's kind of the centralized blockchain or the enterprise blockchain. A lot of Bitcoin loyalists and Bitcoin in general might have come out of kind of an anarchist or cypherpunk kind of movement early on. Stefan is part of that. And so that's kind of the general criticism. So I wanted to give you guys a chance to respond to that, and then I'll combine the second question because Stefan has some presentation.
Papo que rola muito é que o Bitcoin não tem nada a ver com o mundo corporativo e a Ripple tem tudo a ver com banco centralizado. Cara, ninguém é inocente, todo mundo aqui quer ganhar dinheiro, velho. o blockchain, o Bitcoin, quem ficou rico ficou. E as pessoas às vezes criam utopias, desejos que, cara, a gente não consegue trazer isso para a sociedade. O que eu quero dizer? Cara, o Bitcoin tinha uma parada meio underground que lá o governo não se metia, que era vários tipos de transações entre as pessoas. Cara, a Ripple fez uma parada melhor que o Bitcoin, mas voltado para a sociedade no dia a dia, para pessoas que trabalham, para pessoas que têm uma vida comum. Querendo ou não, a gente precisa de um Estado, a gente precisa de um banco, e, cara, a maioria das pessoas tem tendência a seguir regras. Então, essa parada aí do Bitcoin, realmente, quem ficou rico aproveitou, ficou, mérito total para quem viu a oportunidade. Só que, cara, aquilo lá não ia continuar por muito tempo. Bitcoin, na verdade, agora a gente não vê muita utilidade de uso. Isso que é o fato. Utilidade de uso a gente está vendo é nesse projeto aqui, tá, galera? Querendo ou não, é o Bitcoin dos bancos, é a XRP. A gente está vendo com os estudos, está se confirmando. Cara, isso aqui foi uma palestra em 2018. Eu nunca parei para ver o Chris Larsen falando. Cara, eu tô achando ele um cara muito lúcido, muito calmo. Quem geralmente se pronuncia bastante é o Brad, mas o Chris, assim, parece ele foca mais na parte técnica, junto com o pessoal que desenvolveu o projeto. O Brad já fala mais na parte de marketing comercial, tu pode ver, nas palestras eles se comunicam. O Chris Larsen nem aparece muito, cara, por isso que eu resolvi trazer o vídeo dele. Tu tá vendo os pensamentos do Chris, que querendo ou não, ele faz parte do projeto desde o início, entendeu? Chris Larsen, ele e o Brad Garlinghouse estão sendo enquadrados. E, cara, eu não vejo muito o Chris se posicionando aqui. Foi uma ótima oportunidade ele tá falando na Google, né, cara? Deixa eu ver o pessoal aqui. Opa, Ripple pode estar a qualquer lado onde gera dinheiro. Mandaram os códigos aqui. 54, 34, E4. O que é isso aqui, cara? Mas vamos lá, vamos continuar. Tá bacana a palestra e o posicionamento do Chris. Vamos continuar.
He's going to give. The second question is, we are living in a crazy kind of environment in terms of cryptocurrency, just speculation on the price of tokens and blockchains. Do you guys think we're in 1999 right now? Is this the kind of a .com bubble that we're experiencing? So yeah, those two questions.
I'll take the first one. You can start with .com. So first of all, the enterprise part I take as a compliment. I think that's precisely what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to build the first blockchain that can actually be used for real use cases. Like when you take any distributed system, when you take a distributed systems class, the first thing your professor will tell you is like your distributed systems still only going to be as good as the nodes it runs on. And so if you think of Bitcoin miners, they're only incentivized to basically hash as efficiently as possible. They're not incentivized to provide physical security for the data centers. They're not incentivized to make decisions in the interest of the network. So they have a very pure incentive to just hash as much as possible, get paid, rinse and repeat. In the case of Ripple, since the validators are chosen by the users, if a validator, for example, votes against a block size increase or something like that, if that were an issue in Ripple, then you would eventually find that users would no longer add that validator to their list, and so that validator would slowly lose influence. And so it's not as much of a system that's like tailored to users like Bitcoin is, where anyone can just run a node and it just auto configures itself, connects to the network. You do have to do that validator selection manually. You have to think about politically speaking, like which validators do you want to empower with your node, etc. So it is more targeted at like actively being managed by companies, things of that nature. But I think the reason that makes a lot of sense is because when you actually go out there into the market, the evil people. You mentioned I'm an anarchist, so I really want to empower people, right? But the people that you got to fight are not all the banks. They're a few very, very powerful players in the market that sort of take a little bit off the top. And those are the people that you want to bypass. And then everyone else, like there's a lot of small banks and regional banks and so on that we've talked to that are really trying to provide better user experience, really trying to provide lower fees, etc. Those are the companies that we want to work with and empower. And it's not just banks, it's payment providers, mobile money providers, and so on. So that's kind of where that different approach comes from. And on the centralization point, I would kind of say that there are a lot of different definitions of centralization, and we're sort of going down the list of meeting more and more of them as we progress. One of the ones that we don't meet yet is that we still run a majority of the trusted validators, but that's something that we're this year going to start rolling out in terms of we have already got a lot of third-party validators running, so people are going to start trusting them this year, and so this is just one more step to kind of go in that direction. And I think if I compare it to where we were with Bitcoin, like with Bitcoin, we had some level of decentralization, again, meeting some of the definitions, but not all. For instance, there's no geographic diversity. It's very concentrated in China right now, but we didn't have a very good roadmap in order to how to overcome that, because the system is really it's just sort of the incentives are set up in a I would now say bad way. Whereas with Ripple, we have the incentives are in order, and so it's just a matter of like validators having the right amount of operational history, so people actually start trusting them, and us having enough confidence in the software to actually continuously let go of more and more of the reins here. So I think it's for Ripple, it's a clearer roadmap to get to a very high level of decentralization. So.
Yeah, and bottom line in decentralization is there's kind of a bright line. If Ripple did not exist, would the network continue to function? Yes. So that's kind of that hard line of which side you're on. And then I think it's Stefan's point, a variety of kind of gradations from there. And then second, I think on what's going on in the market today. So obviously, a really interesting time in the space. Clearly, there is a lot of speculative interest that's going on, and I kind of break that into kind of two parts. One is there's clearly a lot of almost like crypto day trading. It's almost like the days of the early internet with all the day trading. And I think if you look back on most people that were day trading back in 2000, I bet it didn't work out that well for people that were doing that. People shouldn't do that. You could lose all of the, you could lose everything. It's just not a good plan. People should not be putting their retirement money to work day trading, cryptocurrencies. And I think there's a lot of skepticism that you see out there. Nathaniel Popper, for example, is the New York Times. He writes about that skeptically, and he's right to be skeptical. So we think that people should be very careful with that. But there's a second part of speculation I think is being now increasingly driven by institutions. So institutions, funds, we would call it the Wall Street tidal wave, is sort of coming into play here. And I think what's going on there is that very sophisticated people are saying, investors are saying, look, there's some meaningful percentage of this is in fact a second internet, and this internet of value can be as transformational. That's a longer term sort of call that's going to happen. So I'd say that's more constructive speculation. And I think those institutions and those kind of professionals, they've seen what's happened in this last 20 years of the net, the great promise, the overhype, the total bubble, the crash, and then kind of fast forward 20 years where we are today. If you look back, you'd probably say the early promise was probably underhyped, given the impact that all of this has had.
Tá achando bem coerente a palestra, cara.
That's a more constructive view. The use cases for industries, enterprise, payment providers, and other things, that is coming on board. So I suspect that sort of ratio of sort of hopefully the long-term speculative
especulativo a longo prazo.
Use cases starts to look more.
O que ele tá querendo dizer assim, cara, muita gente se dá mal, pelo menos que eu entendi. Aquela famosa, o day trading é uma opção, cara, só que as pessoas acham que todos os projetos vão conseguir fazer isso. Ele já tá falando, criptomoedas é uma coisa que realmente tu tem que tomar cuidado. Porque o investimento pode sumir assim, ó, no estralar de dedo, entendeu? Cara, é muito lúcido ele. Deixa eu ver o chat aqui, como é que tá. Tudo tranquilo, chat? Wagner, XRP, evolução do BTC. Wagner, eu também tenho esse pensamento, tá? Vamos continuar aqui. Tá bacana.
More like what you see in normal markets, because those things can actually work pretty constructively together. The last point on that I think interesting is in the first internet, that kind of started with institutions, VCs, and then Wall Street, and then kind of went on to sort of this day trader, dynamic that you saw. It's kind of the reverse of that, actually. It kind of started with individuals, and now the institutional wave is coming on board. So that's a little bit different, kind of flavor. But definitely, I think the world's never seen anything like this before. So it's trying to grapple, like, what are the metrics? What, is it, you compare it to Visa, you compare it to gold? Is it the first protocol that can be monetized? Lots of new questions.
Awesome, guys. Really appreciate it. Stefan's now going to give an awesome presentation about what's in store on the technical side for Ripple. And then Chris is going to stay here. Stefan's going to come back, and we're going to do a little Q&A with the audience. So take it away.
Yep. So what this is trying to illustrate is if you deploy IntelliLedger on some network, and we envision that there will probably be sort of a global instance of it, just like the internet has a global instance, then you have these different nodes, these little blue nodes here, and we call them connectors, but they're basically like routers in IP. So they basically take in packets on one side, they look at the destination on the packet, they compare it to their routing table, and then they forward that packet towards that destination. Whenever you look at any kind of blockchain presentation, there's a pretty good chance you'll see some kind of graphic that has nodes connected by lines, some kind of graph. And you'll hear things like Bitcoin is the TCP/IP of money. And when we hear that, we cringe a little bit, because if you know anything about how TCP/IP works and how Bitcoin works, they're very different protocols that do very different things in a very different way. And so the challenge that we always have when we talk about IntelliLedger is it is actually a lot like TCP/IP. And through this little presentation, I want to try to convince you as to why I say that. But people already have usually seen some kind of blockchain presentation that already looks a lot like this, but is a little bit more superficial in terms of the similarities. And so if I want to send a packet into this network, I just send it to whichever connector I'm connected to, and it should find its way to whatever receiver I've put on it. So in that way, it's a lot like TCP/IP. Now you might say, okay, so you're routing these packets, but how does actual money really move? So the way that works is that once you have sort of a path and you're sending these packets, each link is responsible for its own settlement. So what we tend to do is if you have two connectors that have a peering relationship with each other, they're going to have this like payment.
Cara, ele tá explicando aí como é que funciona o tráfego da XRP.
And then they're going to eventually
Prestem
settle.
atenção.
And for the core of the network, it makes the most sense
Parte
to settle through a
técnica aí
digital
para
asset.
quem
The reason
gosta.
for that is that they are very easy to move internationally across borders. You have very low costs in terms of when you move them. And since you're going to have a lot of inbound and outbound traffic, it makes sense to just stay in that digital asset to do all of your settlements. But of course, the majority of people, users out there, don't actually have easy access to digital assets yet. And so you do need some kind of some form of support for traditional payment systems. And the interesting thing is that all these settlement networks really do is, move payments across, or like move money. And so that's something that is supported by all the legacy payment networks. So what we can actually do is we can just aggregate to a greater degree. So we wait a little bit longer before we settle. And then we send one big payment across. So you see that kind of at the beginning here with the sender down there and the receiver in the upper right. Where those settlements are happening a little less frequently, and they're a little bit bigger, and they're probably a little bit more expensive, but they can settle lots and lots of these individual packets. And so with this architecture, what that means is that from an end-to-end perspective, we can send a packet at incredibly low latency. We can send it at an incredibly low incremental cost. And so that's really what makes it feel a lot like the internet. You can really just connect to lots of different services and pay for lots of different things without accumulating a lot of fees while doing that. And then sure, there's a settlement eventually, and hopefully these last mile sort of settlements will get more efficient, just like internet connectivity went from 56K modems all the way up to what we have now, where I have Google Fiber, so I'm very happy with that. So yeah, here's a little chart of like the actual architecture. And again, if you're familiar with TCP/IP, they draw the same kind of picture with the 4 layers, which is sometimes called the internet architecture. It's a little bit less detailed than the OSI architecture, but I won't bore you with that. It's just a reference for the people that know that. So the 4 layers actually work a lot very similarly to the 4 layers in TCP/IP. So I just want to go through those 4 and kind of to give you a sense of how this all works together. The way you should think about the interledger layer is that's essentially an abstraction layer. So that's basically the thing that you have all the different ways of moving money below it, and then you have all the different use cases for moving money above it, and it kind of brings them all together. So in the case of the internet, it would be the internet layer has all the different ways of moving information below it and all the different use cases building on top of it. And so now you can have all these different combinations. I can make a Skype call over my Wi-Fi. I can make send an email over my satellite internet. So it really doesn't matter what use case I'm using, which network I'm on, I can combine it in different ways. And so this is kind of doing the same thing for money. Okay, now an application layer, this would be sort of the equivalent of like HTTP, SMTP. This is use case specific. You would make different application layer protocols for different use cases. So one that we've designed so far is called SPSP, or Simple Payment Setup Protocol. And basically all that does is it defines what an internet sort of identifier looks like. So think of that like an email address. And you could send to that type of identifier when you pay somebody as on a peer-to-peer basis, or you could build that into simple apps. It's not super efficient. So it's kind of like HTTP. It's sort of a general purpose application layer protocol. You could make a much more specialized one. So for instance, we did an experiment where we built payments into WebTorrent. So basically to pay the uploaders, but also the content creators, which I think is a really cool aspect of this. It's like, it's efficient enough that you can pay a lot of different parties in the flow of whatever app or interaction that you're part of. And we'll see a demo of that in a bit. But I think this is where I expect a lot of variety is on the application layer. Now, we'll talk about the transport layer. So if you're familiar with TCP/IP, this is where you find your TCP. And TCP is really common to a lot of different application layer protocols that build on it. And it gives you some sort of basic services, right? It gives you sequencing of packets so that your data comes out the right order. It gives you retransmission. If a packet gets lost, it'll send it again, and so on. And we have a transport layer protocol called PSK2, and it does a lot of the same things. It's responsible for doing things like if you send a large payment, it'll split it into smaller chunks and then reassemble them. It'll do things like retransmission of payment packets, etc. So again, like I'm trying to really get across, like we're copying from the internet a lot, and we have to give them a lot of credit because a lot of things that they do actually apply to money very well. Now, the interledger layer is kind of an interesting one because that's where all the routing happens. And when we first started out, I'll tell you one anecdote.
Deixa eu ver aqui. Cara, vocês estão meio que entendendo ali que ele está explicando o mecanismo para nós. Teve um pump hoje, né, gurizada? A notícia, o porquê do pump, não tô por dentro, tá? Como eu digo, eu não fico acompanhando o preço, cara. não sei se está ligado com algum tipo de notícia, esse pump, mas o que eu soube hoje, né, que o pessoal estava comentando no grupo lá, é que teve uma questão de um terremoto de novo, né, galera? Tá muito mal explicado. Mas aqui o que eu trouxe para vocês são questões técnicas para vocês entenderem o projeto, entendeu? Como é que aqui, cara, ele tá explicando detalhadamente. Tu tá pegando uma visão técnica do como é que funciona o livro Razão e o XRP, cara. Tem muita gente que não entende. Eu achei bacana e mais pelo Chris tá conversando, porque tu encontra poucos vídeos dele falando.
When we first started out, we assumed that the routing would have to be quite different because we're talking about money after all. We're not talking about information. And so we knew about BGP and how it works and so on, but we thought a lot of those things wouldn't be applicable. We wanted to route by the lowest cost path. We thought that was the most important thing, was to minimize the fees. But as we're actually building it, we realized that if you optimize by fees, what can happen is somebody in the network just advertises an absurd rate. So they just advertise, hey, I can exchange $1 for 600 euros. Now that's suddenly the best path to take for absolutely every payment in the entire network. Now, what do you think is going to happen? So that node's going to go down. Obviously, that rate was never real to begin with. And so the whole thing just breaks down. And so one of the reasons for the way the BGP is designed is to make the length of the path one of the primary metrics. And what that does is if someone advertises some ridiculous metrics, you're still only going to take down his immediate neighborhood, because for everyone else, it's still going to look like a big detour, a very long path that they don't want to take. And so it turns out that even for money, the length of the path is a very good proxy for all the other things you might be interested in, like how reliable is it, what's the latency, what's the fees. Those are all lower or tend to be lower for shorter paths. And so we can do exactly what BGP does in terms of routing by shortest path first, and then using other metrics to kind of tie break if paths are the same length, picking the best one. And we just basically add fee as another metric, just like the internet has latency. I already kind of talked a little bit about the settlement. The key thing to mention here is that all we need from the settlement layer is that it can transmit money. It doesn't have to be very fast. It doesn't have to be very cheap. If it's slower, we just settle less often. And just to give you some examples of the kinds of things we've integrated with already, there's a XRP PayChain plugin. So that's settling using the XRP ledger. That's the most efficient plugin right now. That's one of the reasons that we feel good about the strategy, is like we're actually seeing in practice that our own products score really well on these different metrics. In terms of like what ledger would you actually choose for settlement. We've done a Lightning integration. So we did a little test where we actually connected the Bitcoin Lightning Network and the Litecoin Lightning Network together. If you're not familiar with Lightning, it's basically a scalability overlay network for currencies like Bitcoin. And then you could do something like ACH. You can even do cash if you want, right? So you can have a relationship with an interledger service provider where it basically says like, I give you cash up ahead of time, or you give me cash ahead of time.
Te dou dinheiro antes do tempo. Olha a velocidade do troço, cara.
We have to settle up again. Okay, now with all that prefix, I'm going to give you a bit of a live demo part, and it has some more text. A paid API that can turn sketches into developer. So I'll go show you what that looks like. So first thing I need to do is I need to pick my sketch. So I'm just going to grab one here. And so this is the sketch of my website. It's probably a little bit small to see, but it has like some text, and it has a little chart, and it has some more text. And just to be clear, again, like the AI is mocked out. We didn't actually create the AI just for the demo. That would be ridiculous. But yeah, in the future, this could very well be possible. So now I'm going to say make my site, and now things are going to happen very quickly. So it's going to upload that sketch to that AI. It's already done. And now it's uploaded the finished HTML that got back to a service that turns into the Docker container. And as you can see on the right, and I might do the demo twice so you can see it again. On the right, you saw the total amount paid. This is in XRP drops. So this would be 1/1,000,000th of an XRP. So total paid would be 0.1 XRP, which is about, what is that, 2 cents, 3 cents?
Cara, deixa eu entender. Vamos tentar raciocinar junto. Isso aqui foi uma demonstração das transações feitas em segundos por um XRP. Foi um total aqui de 1.562,25 transações. Será que foi isso, galera? E o custo foi de 2 a 3 centavos. Ele fez uma demonstração como é que funcionaria na rede a transação. Cara, é absurdo o que esse troço faz, cara. Vocês já pararam para analisar isso? O absurdo que essa moeda faz? Custando 2, 3 centavos, e a quantidade de transações confirmadas? Deixa eu ver o chat aqui. Vocês perceberam isso? Cara, estão anos-luz na frente com as concorrências. Cara, às vezes tu vai pensar, David, que troço chato. Cara, isso aqui, vamos dizer, é o potencial da moeda. Tu tá vendo ao vivo como é que a XRP funciona. Esquece um pouco o valor. Olha a necessidade, olha o que ela tá fazendo, cara. Ela fez todas essas transações em 1 segundo. Com valor baixíssimo comparado com uma Ethereum. Cara, por isso que tá rolando o processo, por isso que tem muito jogo de interesse. Cara, que isso aqui é uma parada revolucionária, vai marcar uma época isso aqui. Vamos dizer assim, teve finanças antes XRP Ledger, Ripple, pós-XRP. Cara, é outro nível o projeto. Vocês têm que entrar, tem que ter esse pensamento. Eu sei que às vezes pode ser um vídeo chato, mas, cara, eles estão te mostrando, ó, é isso aqui que ela faz, ó. E tu tá vendo ao vivo ali as transações, cara. Eles não estão inventando. Deixa eu ver aqui. Ouvi dizer, Graziele, ouvi dizer que algumas pessoas com informações privilegiadas, quando souberem o fim do processo, farão a procura pela XRP valorizar antes de nós sabermos. O mais impactante não é a velocidade, mas são, assim, 1.500 cada... É muita coisa, cara. 1.500 o quê? Desculpe, me ausentei por segundo. Gustavo, aqui eu vou repetir o vídeo. Ó. Aqui ele está demonstrando a quantidade de transações que o XRP faz num segundo. Ó. Vou repetir aqui para vocês verem. Ó. Ele fez um teste para vocês verem a quantidade de transações que é feito durante uma queima de XRP. Foi o que eu entendi. Ó, ele fez um esboço aqui falando da inteligência artificial. Cara, vocês estão entendendo aqui como é que o XRP funciona.
So now I'm going to say make my site, and now things are going to happen very quickly. So
processo.
It's going to upload that sketch
Ele ativou.
AI. It's already done.
Tá fazendo todas as transações em segundos.
Back to a service that turns into the Docker container.
Ó, terminou.
And as you can see on the right, and I might do the demo twice so you can.
Através da queima de XRP foi feito todas essas transações, um total de 15 mil ou 1.500, sei lá. Só que foi todas as transações feitas nesse período ali de teste. Cara, é uma coisa absurda, velho.
You can see it again. On the right, you saw the total amount paid. This is in
total valor pago.
This would be 1/1,000th of an XRP, so total paid would be 0.1 XRP.
Olha a quantidade do XRP. 2, 3 centavos.
$2, $3. No,
$3. Mas perdeu, velho?
Yeah, it's like 30 cents or something.
30 centavos.
So you can see like the individual packets, and there's a couple things going on. And I think I will run through the demo again just so you can see. So first, when we paid that AI, we paid a sort of one lump sum amount. And then the packager is actually a streaming paid endpoint. So that's a paid endpoint where as we send it data and we ask it to do things, we'll stream packets to it to keep it paid. And if we ever don't keep up, it'll like stop working until we pay it more. And then we deployed it to a host, bought a domain, and then sent a tip to the developer. And I can actually click this button here and then look over here. And as you can see, our website is now up. And I can actually show you it's like all of this running locally, but we got a domain, etc. It's like set it up. So let's go through the demo one more time just so you can see kind of the streaming payments part a little bit better. So I'll pick the same website. So here on the right, you can see like total paid right now is 500 drops. It's to pay for the AI.
Ele tá fazendo de novo o teste.
Pay for the packager. So this is going in 250 drop intervals. And then we have a larger expense to host the website, 9,000 drops. It's over 9,000 to actually buy the domain. And then finally, we tip the developer 1,000 drops. And so if I make an app like that, I have a built-in business model. And I think that's really the key point to get across here. Is I think this will have a huge impact on the web. Where
Deixa eu falar com vocês. Cara, ele tá meio que fazendo uma demonstração da parada. Isso aí. É muito... Cara, tá em outro patamar o projeto, velho. Se depender da XRP, nós vamos passar o carnaval duro com dinheiro. Cara, é complicado. Tá um pump aí, a galera tá fazendo aí, tá... Mas, cara, eu tô te mostrando o potencial. Cara, eu acredito que esse ano vai ter uma valorização, cara, mas te agarra nisso aqui, velho. As instituições vão usar o potencial da parada. Olha quantas transações ela faz por segundo. Os bancos estão apaixonados por esse projeto, velho. Eles vão usar. Olha o que eles vão economizar de mão de obra. Vão agilizar o serviço. É muito difícil ter um erro naquele sistema criptografado da Ripple ali, do XRP Ledger. Cara, o projeto está em outro nível, velho.
think about if I start a convenience store, I don't need to think about what my business model is. My business model is people pay me when they come buy things. When I open a restaurant, I don't think about my business model. My business model is people pay for the food that they eat. On the internet, we have this weird thing where like there isn't a good way to charge people for using your website. And so we build advertising, we build subscriptions and all kinds of hacky workarounds for like how to get money out of people just from visiting your website. And I think this will present a pretty efficient alternative in the future where people can just pay you for using your site. So that's it. And we can go back to this. Thank you.
Thank you,
Eu
Stefan.
fiz uma apresentação aí da parte técnica do troço, cara, como funcionaria.
Cool. Now we'd like to open it up to
Deixa eu ir
questions from
pulando, velho.
majors, and then there's kind of a, you'll see more and more use cases popping up from different angles, and that just kind of drives more liquidity. So I think that's probably the way in my opinion, how it pans out. But,
yeah, I think the reason we developed IntelLedger and the reason we built an interoperability protocol was because of that exact realization. It wasn't going to be everyone using one system. There was going to be a number of different systems. And actually, behind it is another realization, which is, my goal has always been, to solve the problem of, the friction in payments, right? And so I realized that decentralization wasn't necessarily the solution because you see PayPal, they come out, they're free, then eventually they check up their fees when they have an established market position. But then you see Bitcoin doing the same thing, not necessarily with as much sort of agency, but it still happens that way. And so what you got to think about is right now, when you're on a payment network, you can only send money to the people on the same network. And that's kind of like pre-internet online services where you could have like CompuServe and you can email anyone on CompuServe and you can, use any services that are on CompuServe, but you can't access any services that are on Genie, right? And so CompuServe has this like moat. They have a defensibility around their reach. And so that's really what you got to commoditize or what you got to attack. And so with payments, it's still that way today where like if you're on the same payment network, you can pay each other. If you're on different networks, you can't. If you want to pay from your PayPal account to a mobile money account in Tanzania, you're screwed, you can't. Yet I can totally go on my mobile phone in Tanzania and open any website in the world, right? So we need that kind of interoperability, and that's really what creates the competition that drives down.
Cara, eles vão facilitar assim, ó. Eu entendi o principal foco deles. Cara, é evitar burocracia pra galera aí. Tu tá em qualquer lugar do mundo e às vezes tu quer negociar com alguém, tu quer comprar alguma coisa de repente num outro país. Cara, através desse mecanismo aqui vai te facilitar muito. Vai te facilitar muito, cara. Vai ser que nem eu comentei antes. Antes de XRP e pós-XRP. Questão de finança, velho. Cara, eu nem sei quanto tempo de vídeo eu tenho que controlar minhas horas no StreamYards. Cara, não, olha como é a coisa. Esse vídeo foi na Google, postado em 23 de fevereiro de 2018. Eu vou perguntar para vocês, vocês imaginavam uma parada dessa? Ele fez uma demonstração ao vivo em 2018, como a XRP funciona. Cara, valores absurdos. Por isso que eu digo ainda que tem gente, que XRP 50 mil dólares é ilusão, teoria de... Cara, eu vou te dizer que XRP depois de um tempo é valores absurdos, velho. Pelo potencial que a moeda tem, pelo que o XRP Ledger faz. Cara, os caras estão muito, vamos dizer, muito à frente do seu tempo. Já em 2018 eles já estavam muito na frente, cara, da época que a gente está acostumado a viver. Gustavo, boa noite. Tá. Essa semana estou vendo várias notícias sobre a onda de ataques cibernéticos irão acontecer. Seria para tirar alguns do jogo? Mostrar a garantia de segurança a alguns? Interessante, né? Não. Cara, minha opinião, cara. Ataque cibernético tem... que eu acredito, tá? Tem uma agenda pré-programada. O que essas pessoas fazem que tem certo poder no mundo, cara? Eles querem mostrar a fragilidade desse atual sistema e apresentar um novo. Que, na meu ver, seria easy uma parada com um potencial que nem a Ripple. Entendeu? Cara, é muita teoria de conspiração rolando, cada um tem uma opinião diferente. Uma coisa que eu acredito, cara. A Ripple ali, o Dave Schwartz, o Arthur Brito e o Jared McLevin, cara, eles desenvolveram uma parada que tá muito à frente do nosso tempo que a gente tá vivendo agora, cara. Esse vídeo foi lá em 2018 e olha já o potencial, cara. Poucas pessoas sabem do potencial. Cara, tu pergunta para uma pessoa assim, eu vou fazer um teste com vocês. Pergunta para uma pessoa assim, cara, tu nunca te perguntou como é que o Pix funciona, por que o dinheiro cai tão rápido na tua conta? Na cabeça da pessoa é alguém na frente de um computador, tá? Lá no banco, eu vou te dizer que eu acho que a maioria das pessoas pensam. que é alguém num computador, num sistema, ou um computador trabalhando, aí até tudo bem. Mas eles não sabem assim o potencial que por exemplo, um XRP faz 1.500 transações por segundo, eles nem imaginam o que é um XRP, cara. Então, lá em 2018, cara, a informação tava, eu nem imaginava. Eu fui conhecer esse mundo de criptomoedas no final de 2020 e 2021. Em 2018, os caras já estavam, vamos dizer, com um projeto quase pronto, com detalhes ainda a ser concretizado. Gurizada, eu vou ter que encerrar a live porque eu tenho que controlar o meu tempo aqui no StreamYards, tá? Senão eu não vou conseguir gravar mais lives, tá? Eu tô tentando fazer menos de 1 hora. Senão fica aquela situação que, como eu tô na versão free, eu consigo gravar no máximo 20 horas por mês de live. Depois só a versão paga. Eu até me esqueci de comentar com vocês da vaquinha. Isso aqui é a vaquinha do canal, para quem quiser ajudar, para mim poder adquirir a versão paga do StreamYards, tá? Para poder não ter limite de hora. Quem quiser ajudar, a gente já arrecadou R$400, é $250. Quem quiser, tá aqui a chave Pix. Toda vez do vídeo eu passo aqui a situação para vocês, é para a gente poder adquirir ela e não ter essa questão de horas. Não me limita, eu não consigo gravar. Eu uso essa plataforma que é muito boa, tá? Não deixa derrubar a live, eu tô gravando no Wi-Fi e tá de boa. Às vezes acontece aquelas situações de dar uma chuva muito forte, temporal. Tá, daí não adianta, não tem o que fazer. Cara, eu espero que tu tenha curtido o vídeo. Reforçando, se tu quiser assistir, eu vou botar aqui também para vocês acompanhar na íntegra todo o vídeo, tá? Cara, foi na Google isso aqui, tá? 2018. Os caras já estavam na Google. Quem quiser lá assistir depois, fica à vontade. Assistir toda a live deles lá do Chris Larsen. Fagner, cara, tá muito avançada a parada. Tem gente que só critica. Eu vejo cara, eu enxergo a XRP, a Ripple, assim, como uma oportunidade única. Tá muito à frente, cara. Eu não consigo ver nenhum projeto se aproximar deles. De repente, uma XLM por ter um cara que ajudou a desenvolver o XRP, que é o GR de McLeod. E, cara, eu vou te dizer, eu não acredito que ele tem... Ele não, vamos dizer assim, eu acredito que quando ele saiu da Ripple, a Ripple pegou ele muito bem nas questões jurídicas, para ele não divulgar a tecnologia. Porque um dos motivos que tem, assim, na internet, que o GR saiu, que ele estava querendo vazar a informação, a tecnologia da empresa para as concorrentes. Então, ele resolveu montar a Stellar, de repente, ele... Cara, é bastidor, gente, não imagina. Mas, cara, uma coisa é certa, a Ripple está muito à frente. Questão de preços, a gente depois vai passar um tempo, vocês vão se lembrar de mim. XRP 50 mil, para mim, é um valor pequeno ainda. Daqui um tempo, acredito, uns 8 anos... Cara, é questões de milhões essa moeda, pelo que ela proporciona. Cara, ninguém vai conseguir segurar até lá. Os valores realmente, os verdadeiros valores dela. Muita gente vai sair fora e porque, cara, já vai mudar a vida de muita gente. Até mês que vem vai ser live. Não entendi aqui a última. Cara, eu vou ter que me encerrar aqui, senão eu perco, vamos dizer assim, eu perco tempo na próxima live, tá? David, o que você acha da XLM? Vai ter um impacto do que XRP? Cara, a XLM, assim, ó, tá na questão de tokenização, tá? Que eu entendi. Ela vai ajudar bastante. Cara, é a prata, no meu ver, tá? O ouro é a XRP, a XLM é a prata. Qualquer moeda ISO vale ter no teu portfólio de investimentos, tá? Lembrando, não é conceito de compra, é conceito de estudos, mas, cara, eu vou dizer que é um potencial semelhante. XLM também é um grande projeto. Qualquer projeto envolvendo a ISO, cara, é muito bem-vindo, entendeu? Você tem que ter esse pensamento. Tá, galera? Espero que vocês tenham curtido aí. Até o próximo cafezinho. Tamo junto. Grande abraço. Valeu!